Off to a great start. Okay, so we went through our introduction. I'm gonna talk about how the master plan process comes together. A little bit of data collection towards the end. We'll talk about how that gets executed into maps and that later conversation and how those become part of the bigger picture. So to get started about what a master plan is, we look at the legal definition first. That the state of Massachusetts provides, and its such plan shall be a statement through text maps, illustrations, or other forms of communication that is designed to provide a basis for decision-making regarding the long-term physical development of the municipality. The comprehensive plan shall be internally consistent in its policies, forecasts, and standards. So when we're doing master plans, we're looking for 10 years approximately. That doesn't mean that there won't be things that come up that we know take longer than that. So we'll consider those projects that are things for the town to consider moving forward. And then as we break down those goals, some things will be short. They have a 1 to 2 year turnaround, 5 to 10, and then moving on from that 10. So OCPC is the local RPA for the Greater Brockton area, including East Bridgewater. We were hired by the town to help them put the master plan together. So our role is most importantly to listen to the community by doing public outreach and understand the community's goals and priority for the town. We gather, analyze, and present information through presentations and through the creation of the plan, and to most importantly, help make a plan that responds to the goals that the residents and staff of the town have. So the state has certain required elements that we hit. We design the master plan around them through chapters. So first is a statement of goals and policies. So that'll cover the overall arching plan moving forward. And then it's broken down to land use, housing, economic development, natural and cultural resources, open space and recreation, sustainability and climate change, services and facilities, transportation and circulation, and the implementation strategy. So the purpose or the intention of the master plan is for the town to have a document that is both a collection of data and personal experience that combined creates a guide for local public policy, helps inform the town in terms of making decisions such as drafting or editing bylaws, finding areas of most important for land preservation, areas the town should target for economic development, how to prioritize conservation area in different ways, allocating funds for capital improvement through the town itself and in municipal buildings, advocate for needed services, and capture the wants and needs of the community. So when we're doing this every 10 years, it's really an experience for the town residents and the government to be working together in a collaborative measure. So the types of information that we look at span a little bit of everything. So we're reviewing previous plans. We're looking at the former master plans, open space and recreation plans. We're looking at housing production plans, current zoning and bylaws. We're also having face-to-face interviews with department staff to kind of get more of a understanding of the on-the-grounds work that they're doing. And then we're looking at data put out by the state on agriculture and water resources and land values, and then also looking at demographic data from the census. And it does not want to change slides now. There we go. And then the most important thing that really separates each master plan one to the next is the public input. So we do this through these workshops, and we're keeping an active presence with the website and social media. We've done tabling events. We're doing tabling events. We'll be at the library on Friday during the biannual book sale. And we allow public comment submissions at any time. And we also have a master plan steering committee, and they are a group of residents in town who sometimes also sit on other boards. And in our case, they do. And they are really eager to help us provide the best master plan for the town, and they do that by keeping us on track and reviewing the work that we're doing, providing things that we might not have picked up on other conversations, and yeah, just giving their shared experience of living in town. So the master plan process is moving pretty quickly. So we started with demographic research and the launch of the survey. And now we're in the phase of we're writing the plan, and the survey is still out. It closes on March 12th. So if you haven't done it yet, please do. And please make sure that all your friends and neighbors did. We have over 600 responses to the survey, so that's going really well. And we are been putting together these public meetings and holding them. This is the second one, and this is the online version of the second one, so it's technically the third. And in the background, all of us are putting together all this data and all these conversations and turning them into chapters. And then in the spring and early June, we'll have a public review, and we'll submit the final list of actions and objectives for everybody to see. Anybody have any questions so far? And we're gonna switch over to the other app. So we're gonna take a look. I'll switch from the talking about the process to talking about some of the maps that we have been reviewing, and the information they provide. And then I will ask OCPC staff if they want to chime in on anything to please do so as we go through. So the first maps are going to be zoning versus land use. So we take a look at these to start off by seeing where everything is supposed to go in town. And then we compare this with land use to see, is it following that? Are there areas that are starting to change on their own? Are there areas that the town would like to see change? And then questions that we start to ask, is there anywhere zoning may need to change over time, or is there a want to change over time? And how much of the industrial and business spaces are actually usable? So an industrial space or a business space can look very large, but it doesn't mean that the parcels itself are able to be built out to that potential due to wetlands, due to access ways, due to current use restraints. So if we expand an industrial zone, but you expand it through, say, a residential area, it's not going to turn from houses to businesses overnight. Does anybody have any initial reactions for these maps that they want to provide? And then please know if you want to look at these later on. It's a lot to look at kind of half zoomed in on a screen, but these are all in the PowerPoint for you to view at any point afterwards. So a next big piece of conversation that we've been talking about with the town is the potential expansion of industrial use or business use in town. Based on some input and curiosity, the town just approved sewer to go through the top quadrant in this industrial section coming down the route. So those were some things that we discussed in the previous meeting. And then I will slide over here to this next map. So this is a food access map. So we were talking about the town used to have a grocery store in the carriage shopping plaza, but it no longer does. And what are the alternatives to food access for residents in town? So these are the grocery stores themselves within a 1 mile radius. So there's more in the surrounding towns, but we were looking for if it touched a boundary within 1 to about 3 miles. And then we were talking about expanding on this map in the future. So another thing we'd like to include are also where active farms that are selling food and are potentially having farm stands, and where there's potentially an interest in adding farm stands to the map. In town, we also talked about alternatives. So the long-term goal can be to have a grocery store in town, and what type of grocery store do we want, the size, the look, where in town is it most accessible? But we know that that requires there to be an investment coming in. And we also want to have alternatives in the meanwhile. So another conversation we had is, can BAT expand bus routes that link from the center of town on these major routes to give people who are either not having access to a car, or teenagers who are trying to help out at home, or are residents who would like to be less dependent on their own vehicle, how can we get them a bus route that runs from town to a local grocery store so they're able to get food without having to be so dependent on vehicles? Anyone have anything they want to provide or chat about on this subject?
I think that's a great idea.
Awesome. All right, I will keep moving along, but anybody stop me at any point. Actually, before I move on, Nick, do you want to add anything to your points about economic development in this section?
Yeah. So I'm Nick. I'm the economic development guy. So naturally, Rhiannon, can you go back to the zoning map real quick?
Yeah.
Naturally, my focus is on improving local and regional economies and positioning towns for growth and resiliency with things like new development, redevelopment, job creation, industry clusters, business development, stuff like that. So the interesting aspect about economic development, or my role, I should say, in this region as part of OCPC, is that we tend to work with communities that I'm going off track a little bit, but it's going to make sense. We work with communities that are historic, often dominated by residential neighborhoods. So if you're looking at the zoning map, that's a lot of yellow, right? It's a lot of residential, and so we're working with a lot of communities that have residential neighborhoods and natural assets, and that are rich in character, so to speak. So we understand, the community preservation and community identity, and we really, as an economic development person, we try not to lose sight of that in proposing new ideas. But I like to say that when we begin looking at zoning and talking about the ideas of new development and that sort of thing. That said, our region in OCPC is really in the heart of what was the post-industrial fallout of New England, right? That has sort of left long-standing impacts on communities like East Bridgewater, its neighboring towns. But East Bridgewater has seen some of that, right? And while towns like East Bridgewater are primarily residential, many are still well positioned for growth, and new commercial investment goes a tremendously long way, even with small projects. So while it may not seem like there is a lot of commercial industrial space given the size, I look at something like this and think, well, yeah, there's many things that we can work with here. So from an obvious perspective, looking at the zoning map, yeah, East Bridgewater relies very heavily on residential property taxes. I think there's I think you guys have a residential level of levy of 89%, right? And in a commercial tax base that is pretty small, 10% or so. But recent history, I think, having dug a little bit into some of the statistics about the town, recent history would suggest that the business community has been fairly sustainable. I know there's been very few commercial vacancies or departures that have disrupted growth or negatively impacted neighborhoods. And I guess in recent years, the town, it's been slow to add new growth, with mainly, I think, only annual residential development that's constructed each year probably contributes around 1% growth each year, which means that the tax base is getting bigger, which means that there's more money coming in. However, the new commercial development along Route 18 and what has become the North Bedford Street sewer district that Rhiannon had mentioned, that's begun to spur some positive growth trends. And Charlie, I think you had sent me some figures. I know in FY24 at only partial completion, that new warehouse, which is what 400,000 square feet, has already doubled the new growth figures. So, which wasn't a large stride, but helped bring in 2%, right? So, and a portion of that coming from new residential development in local neighborhoods as well. But I guess my point being, what I've learned in this role is that any new development in small towns like East Bridgewater, they can go a very long way. I used to work in purely cities, and it takes a bit more time to impact the budget there or have any sort of effect. But that said, I think looking at the map and you guys are already working on some stuff along Route 18. It's striving for more growth and keeping the town's economy in good health. I think it makes sense that priority should be given to diversifying the town's tax base and strengthening that local business community to ultimately grow the commercial market. And relying, I think relying too heavily on a narrow range of revenue sources, especially for residents, will leave the town particularly vulnerable. So if by expanding the town's commercial footprint and attracting businesses from diverse industries, I think the town will be able to spread its tax burden more evenly and foster a more dynamic and vibrant local economy. So that's generally where when we talk about development or economic development and we're looking at the zoning map, I'm looking at some of these areas and these are some of the things that are going on in my brain, but I don't know if there's any value there. But before you get you're in and you can proceed. I have questions for people at the end, but if you want to continue and then we can just get to it later.
No, I just wanted to recap one thing you said, and then please feel free. I just
Okay.
wanted to note Nick's comment about increasing the tax diversity. So one thing that hits this part of the state really hard with residential towns is just how high property taxes can be. And it's even when they're high, it's still really not ever enough money to go around for all the things that a town needs to really thrive and meet capacity for its residents. So when we're talking about, I'm a land conservation person, that's why Nick does the economic development stuff. So when we talk about these things, we're looking to find the balance for the town. How do we preserve character and residential basis, and how do we tie that into diversifying tax so you can live here and not feel so strained by having a high property tax? And also, when you are paying to live in a beautiful town like East Bridgewater, that you're getting all the needs met by the municipality. That's all I wanted to chime in with, Nick. Please feel free to ask questions to the audience or
Cool.
our
Yeah.
audience, our crew.
Sure. I won't go too crazy with questions because some of these will could spiral us into an hour-long conversation. But I know we talked about like what's going on Route 18 in the town and in the sewer district and stuff. And one of the questions I guess I'd be interested in hearing from folks on is hearing about the downtown. It really seems to have like a diversity of things that people might need or want in their daily lives, right? And I'm spending some time thinking about like what might be some good recommendations for this area. But I know they have you got some takeout, you have a restaurant, I think it's a coffee center and a couple banks and the library and all that. I guess I'd be interested in knowing what people would like to see in this area. I know it's kind of a walk over to Carriage Grove, but I also know that the downtown isn't necessarily like very walkable, nor is there any sort of large amount of tenants in that area, right? It's all kind of abutted by residential neighborhoods. So just curious to hear from someone or a couple of people about what people would like to see here or what a more vibrant downtown would look like to them.
Hey Nick, we did get a comment in the notes a few minutes ago, so it might be a little off. But John Haynes was saying in coordination with the idea of bat expansion for accessing food needs, the town has had very preliminary conversations with bat about expanded services to access our two urgent care medical facilities located on Route 18 in East Bridgewater to service residents from surrounding communities, including residents of Brockton requiring health services.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thanks. But yeah, I'd be any sort of any feelings anyone has about you know what a better performing downtown or a more vibrant or livable downtown would look like. I'd love to hear about it.
And if anybody doesn't want to talk because they're being recorded, please do grab my email
Yeah,
from
that's
the
fine. If
chat
there are any
and
other ideas that come up later on,
yeah.
feel free. You know, I'll leave my info in the chat. But if there are ideas or questions that come up later, you know, feel free to message me. Oh, I did see something roll in here, Rhiannon. I'd love to see more places to shop, restaurant choices, coffee nooks, easier ways to cross the street. Thanks, Diane. That's that's great. I think that makes sense. And that actually kind of it gets my brain thinking more about it doesn't seem like one of the interesting things I've noted about the downtown, and you know, feel free to chime in. There doesn't appear to ever be like any sort of vacancies. It seems that you know, the space is always occupied. Maybe not necessarily a lot of foot traffic, but there's not much area to really walk and shop around there per se. So, and I know, you know, there's the two brownfields vacant properties on the very outskirt there of the downtown. So I know the town has done some looking into what might be viable over there, and so you know this generates some thoughts for me on like mixed use and what other first floor commercial space in that area would be useful.
Could you just, while we're on it, could you just explain brownfields and the work that you do with OCPC on?
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people on this probably are well familiar with the vacant plots of land on the outskirts is it West Union? I forget the name of the road. The old Eastern State Steel and old Precise Engineering sites that have sat there for quite some time. So you know, we at OCPC we were able to secure $500,000 to basically find out what is left in that soil in order for it to be cleaned up. So we have some money to hire an environmental professional that would come out to certain sites within the OCPC region to assess what types of things are in the soil that need to be remediated so that it would spur development. So that site is a specific site that we're working with Charlie and in the town on you know, potentially, you know, digging into no pun, but looking, you know, doing some potentially doing some assessment work to find out further what is in that area, what's remaining in that soil that needs to be remediated before any potential development can proceed. So naturally, that site in being where it's located and its history, it would be extremely advantageous for the town to clean that up, right, and get that teed up for something. And I think it would probably be a great additive feature to the downtown and whatever the community's desires are. But from an economic perspective, I forget how many acres are there, but it's, you know, something like that would be extremely beneficial in terms of you know, helping the tax base for sure. But I think in the past, and Charlie, feel free to jump in. I think there was some conversation or some work done on, you know, exploring the potential for the impact of mixed use in that area. Yeah, I hope that cover everything, Rhiannon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and also I just maybe to add that whether or not the brownfields in East Bridgewater are selected in the specific project that we're working on, that it's an ongoing effort and funding with the EPA is an ongoing effort. And the town could be able to apply on their own, or they could work with OCPC moving forward if they need to redo this effort later on. All right. Any last thoughts before we move on? So in contrary to economic development, I'm going to talk a little bit about land conservation and protection. So here I have an example of the state's data set on biomap. So biomap is broken down into two sectors. It's elements and components. And this is the most recent edition that was published late last year. So a breakdown of how these maps work and differentiate. So the elements map is looking at core habitat and landscape. And then when we look at the component side, it's a deeper breakdown of that. And then in addition, they've added areas that are of local significance in this recent update. So these are things that while when you look at a statewide data set, they do not pop up as being important or of significance, does not mean that on a local small scale, such as a town, that they do not hold a higher value, which is an incredible addition to the data set because it gives us so much more information when we pull up a town view, as you can tell by the amount of color in the second map versus the first. So the most obvious ones that come up, of course, are land that surrounds waterways. Preserving land in those areas is important in the sense that we want to make sure that we're keeping the water clean, but they also serve as habitat for many animals. And then having that land preserved doubles back on the town and creates water filtration and prevents runoff from entering waterways and can help keep clean water for areas of recreation as well. So we want to look at these and think about in the future, where do we want to put land aside that should be aimed at conservation versus development, whether that be residential, commercial, or industrial. So as a side-by-side to this, we include a map of lands over here. So we have both open space land here and lands that are restricted. And then we have Chapter 61, Chapter 61A, and Chapter 61B lands. So a breakdown of the different levels of this. So Chapter 61A, Chapter 61, Chapter 61A, and Chapter 61B are all lands that are in temporary protection. So it is only as long as it is under this tax title. So it's for forests, it's for untouched open space, and it's for agriculture lands. So it's an important data set for the town because with Chapter 61, they gain access to right of first refusal. So once it's being potentially sold, the town has the ability to put it in conservation before it gets sold and is potentially not used in the same way anymore. So looking at this map here, try to zoom in a little bit more so you can just see some of the labels. So the dark greens and the dark blues are the land that's under temporary protection. And then the bright green is land that's owned by Department of Fish and Game. Pink is town-owned lands. The light orange is nonprofit. And then the dark orange is privately owned lands that are under an environmental conservation restriction. So when you look at these side by side, you can see that many of these pieces do actually fall along the critical land components. And when we're thinking about moving forward, something that's super important when looking at land in terms of habitat is creating connection between them. So if we have a bunch of parcels that are preserved, but there's no way to move from one to the other, we're still dealing with the interference of wildlife being potentially harmed, and trying to migrate and move. And then additionally, we look at connecting them in terms of how do humans use them. So if we're preserving land, we want to make sure that we're creating connection through trails and footpaths, safe crossways on streets where you have to cross a road to access one side of a park to the other. And just thinking about when we're reviewing the town over the next 10 years to build off of our previous conversation, kind of creating priority areas for development and priority areas for protection. That was a lot of rambling. Does anybody have any comments or questions or thoughts?
Quick question, has the total land acreage that's under some sort of conservation protection for the town been determined? As in
I
total,
have,
what a percentage?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I use Mass Audubon's Losing Ground report, which was last published in 2020, but they look at data in 7-year spans and then it takes a few years for them to publish it. So by the time it's published, it's outdated, but it's our closest estimate. But I can get you those numbers. They will be in the final report.
And is there a typical percentage range that a town would look to have a certain amount of protected conservation land? And when they're doing a master planning effort like this?
I don't look for a certain percentage in my experience. I think how land is used from town to town is so different, and it really depends on the types of habitats that are available. I think the top priority from conversations I've had with East Bridgewater is keeping remaining farmland in farmland. And then if there are any parcels of unprotected land around bodies of water that move through town, kind of creating a ranking of where we'd want to protect land. I know that East Bridgewater has more land that's not necessarily under permanent protection compared to temporary protections. So figuring out really long-term, how do we make sure that all that land doesn't end up developed is the focus. But I've seen a really large range. I've seen from like 10% to almost 50%. It really depends on how the town was developed and when.
Thanks.
Yeah. And actually, those numbers that I mentioned, if you go to the master plan's website on the OCPC page, they're in the first presentation. I did a deep dive of the data and all that's available online.
Rhiannon, we have a question in the chat from Eric. Do we have a timeline on development of various business and residential aspects of new sewer district along Route 18? Seems to me this would be good to track to see what such development is likely to do for or to the town.
I think that question is more for Charlie than for myself.
I can go ahead.
Thank you.
Sure. We know, obviously, Greystar, the building is completed. They, as far as we know, they don't have occupants yet. But in terms of property taxes, we'll, starting with this coming year, we'll see the full amount of property taxes from that development. The proposed 40B project up at the Whitman line is still, I would say, we're talking not this year and maybe breaking ground sometime next year. The reason I'm saying that is that the developer, as far as I know, has not gone to the Zoning Board of Appeals yet for what's called the comprehensive permit, which is what the town issues in connection with 40B developments, or any town would issue. That's a process that takes a few months to go through. There's a series of public meetings and hearings and everything. They go through all aspects of the project. Then, even if the approval was given, he would still have to then confirm his financing. He'd have to line up the contractors and supplies and everything. So it's, there's a possibility that ground could be broken sometime late this year, but that's that chance is receding as the months go by. The proposed 40B is 80 townhouses, 40 duplexes over on the west side of the property. And then there'd be 4 40-unit apartments being built along Route 18. As far as we know, his intention is to build the 40 townhouses first and, build as the market demands, in the sense of everything's not going to go up at the same time. The townhouses would go up, and then it would be one 40-unit apartment building at a time. You probably would not be building all 4 of them. So we're looking at a multi-year project when it gets started. I mean, we have no definite date as to when it's going to get started. The other major development that's been discussed, in the sense of, we know that the property owners, equity associates who own now what was the Compass is now the Signature Medical Facility. They own the building. Signature leases it from them. We know they're marketing the property in terms of trying to find new leaseholders who would want new buildings built there. But again, it's a situation that nothing is happening in terms of permits being pulled or anything like that. So, until again, something is definitive, in the sense of someone goes in to the building office at the town hall and actually pulls the permit, there's no good estimate as to when something like that would happen. You have to find a tenant. The tenant then would work with equity in terms of how large a building to put in and how it'd be put in, everything like that, and costs and such. So right now, Greystar is the sure thing because it's done. The other 2 major projects that we're aware of, or potential large 2 projects that we're aware of, are timelines just aren't definite at this point. And we know that, once the line is built, we think other property owners along Route 18, that's the west side of Route 18, may very well take advantage of it, either through developing their own properties or selling the properties. Obviously, they'd be more valuable at that point to someone who would want to then take advantage of the connection to the sewer system. But that's all hypothetical at this point.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. That's above my pay grade. I like passing that off to Charlie. All right. I'll move on from here. If nobody's got anything else, we've got a few more things to talk about. So another thing that we talked about is looking at, here, let me zoom in here so we can do one conversation at a time. Is where in town are most accidents occurring? The numbers are probably, to most people's not surprise, they are falling along major routes and mostly at intersections, which is common, but we were, looking at this to gauge, these are where there's the most reported accidents. And this is a snapshot from 2020 to roughly 2024, a few months ago when I first pulled it. So we can see where there's the most areas of concern. And then we were just asking, outside of these ones that are so obvious, are there other areas that are dangerous? Do they not feel safe, even if they're not necessarily represented by accidents? Maybe there are a lot of almost accidents, or maybe as a pedestrian or a bicyclist, you see an area of concern. So I will feel free to drop in the chat roadways or intersections that you find sketchy or scary or are not safe, or you've seen potential. If you have ideas for solutions for them, every time you drive through them, you're like, I don't know why there's not a flashing yellow light here. I don't know why there's not a sidewalk here or a crosswalk. Please feel free to add those in with your comments.
I can say, where you see the 363, which I suspect is the intersection Highland and, Route 18 North Bedford. MassDOT just, in fact, and OCPC had staff attend the virtual meeting, but MassDOT has it now started slowly moving on planning to make improvements at that intersection. They held a virtual meeting last week. John attended that, along with myself. So, and to start very preliminary ideas about what the problems are at the intersection, how road improvements could be made north and south of there along North Bedford Street, and also then west and east on Highland Street. So, I mean, obviously there are problem intersections in other locations, but because it's in the top 200 crash sites in Massachusetts, it gets priority from MassDOT versus other locations.
Right, and to expand on that with roadways, gets difficult at a municipal level, of course, because some roads are owned by the state while others are owned by the municipality. So when we're looking at things like Route 18, that falls under the state's jurisdiction, which just requires a different process and takes more time to progress sometimes. Sometimes not.
And I think John's, and other municipal officials are very aware of the problems we've had with Bridge Street and Plymouth Street. But again, it's another MassDOT road. Route 106 is their jurisdiction. I think it's on their list, but it's farther down on their list, despite the fact that I think we've seen just recently in the last few months a number of crashes there. So there's the challenge is whether it's Highland and North Bedford or Bridge Street and Plymouth Street are that the town doesn't have jurisdiction over those intersections. We can, plead our case with MassDOT, but their list is long and their money is short. Let's put it that way. And if you remember how long it took for the improvements to be made on Route 18 south of the Central Street intersection. That had been going, I think it had been going on for a couple of years before I got in 21, and then it still was going on for a number of months after that. And the planning efforts for that had to be a few years before that too. So we share their concerns. The challenges are what we can do to get MassDOT to move ahead on those sites and move them higher up on the list, when I'm sure every single community in Massachusetts wants to be doing the same thing on a MassDOT road. Mind you,
Yeah.
If it was a town road, we might be at least that we'd be using state money for those. If it's a purely town road intersection, the challenge then is finding the money to do anything with it, given the cost of even just paving, let alone reconfiguring an intersection. That can be a traffic signal system can run $500,000 these days, as an example. So.
Back to the projects and problems and stages and time, right? creating the master dream list and taking it from there and spreading it out. And I also wanted to note that OCPC worked with multiple towns along Route 18 and recently did a Route 18 corridor study, which is also helpful when we're presenting to the state, showing that we've already done an analysis of top areas of concern in terms of a bit of pedestrian safety, recommendations for where crosswalks, lights should be added, a little bit about sidewalks, but mostly looking at traffic flow and the accidents that are prime in that area as Route 18 runs through multiple towns. Megan, I think there might be a few other comments I don't want to open it and take up the screen.
Most of there was the two questions, they were relating to the bridge in Plymouth Street.
Okay.
And then John Haynes said, to Charlie's point, that project on Route 18 was originated in 2012 and eventually completed in 2022.
So any transportation projects we plan could be longer than the length of this master plan, but we will take a full inventory of all the things and think about timeline. And another thing is the state's funding changes as money pools from federal, as the state reprioritizes their budget from time to time. So things go from like really slow to rapid. We see that in the planning realm too. We go from real dry spell, and then there was all this money pumped in through different agencies at once, right? So when we create these lists, it's not because there's a lot of worry that when you make a master plan and you make a list, it's all going to come from tax money and tax dollars in the town, and that the residents are fronting the money, but it's also a way to know where we should be looking for grant money when it becomes available. It's good to have a priority list ready to go because grant deadlines can come up quick and unexpected. All right, last for tonight, I just have, this map is more for show, but I'll also talk a little bit about part of the work that we've been doing on the master plan. And if Jason from OCPC is still on the call, he can chime in, but I'll give an overview. So we were looking at critical facilities in town. So these include public and some private utilities. Let me increase this a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. So because this map is so broad, the symbols are a little bit smaller, but I'll zoom in towards like the center of town just as an example. But I just wanted to speak for a second to the process of creating the master plan. One of the main things that we do is we do sit down interviews with department heads in town we've met with the police chief and the fire chief and water department and library and council on aging, and I'm missing people. We meet with Charlie all the time, so that one doesn't count. But we'll also meet with a few boards over the next following months, but we're really trying to get, an initial understanding of the work that the town does every day and where their largest areas of concern are that come up in their work. Also the things that are working well for them. I'll use the library, for example, right? So like the library has incredible attendance in town, but then also when you have that and they provide so much programming, it's how do we keep up with those numbers and how do we make sure that we have something for everybody in terms of interest and age range. So this map is more just to show a little bit about the things that we're looking at the town. So I'm also scrolling down here just so you can see all the things that this map outlines. And then also, if you take more time to look at it on your own, things change over time. So we're using this based off of state identified data. So if you mess around with it and find that something doesn't actually exist anymore, it does happen, please let us know. This is this. Jason, if you're still with us, do you want to add anything about the critical facilities?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything of major importance to add. I'm currently up to my eyeballs in just town data. DOR annual reports, budgets, 40 pages of notes that I've taken from various meetings and conversations. So a lot of research and data analysis. I will flag probably though that I have not met with Charlie yet. So I might be sending him an email with sort of like, I don't know, some more nuanced questions in terms of all things East Bridgewater, but yeah, nothing of major importance to add, I don't think.
Okay, great. That is my last map for our presentation tonight. We've talked a lot of things, and thank you everybody for chiming in. Before I thank everybody again for coming, does anybody have anything they want to revisit? Any last minute thoughts or questions? I will stop sharing screen. Well, thank you, everybody. It was great to talk through some of the work that we've been doing and show some of the data that's been put together. if you didn't see, yes, I will, Diane. If you didn't see the first presentation, I strongly suggest you check out the website for the master plan. So you can access it by going to oldcolonyplanning.org and then typing in East Bridgewater, and it'll come up with all the events that we posted there. And then Charlie, I'm like really certain we have it linked, right, from the town's website. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a link to the OCPC website.
Perfect. So if you go to the town's website, if you're more familiar with that, you can start from there and click over, and it'll direct you over to where we're hosting the site for the master plan. So on that, there's maps that were part of the previous meeting. And then there's also the first presentation. And so it's got a deeper dive of demographic data and some of the same land use stuff that I talked about today and a little bit more than that. So do check that out. Do, while you're there, take the survey if you haven't. Again, that closes March 12th. Super important. Nag everybody you know about it. I know the Buzz Around and the steering committee have done a really big push on social media to get that shared. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, please take my email from the chat. It's also posted on anything that this is posted about. So happy to take feedback and public comment at any time. And I won't keep everybody from dinners and families any longer. So thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you all.
Thanks, see ya.
Thanks, everyone.